to do a quick screencast with some actual data from the disease modeling simulation. So the first graph, the first demo that I put up about making the graph was about something totally different because I didn't have some data. And I'm hoping that I actually took to things that some people had finished. So most people are still in the process of collecting data and making the data table, but I want to make sure that some people can also have some support when they're ready for the next step of making the graph. And I'm hoping this person doesn't mind. I didn't actually get the chance to ask them, but they have created a really good example of what this graph is going to look like. But again, and you're not going to have the exact same graph, even if you have a similar variable. The nice thing about the simulations is that they will give you different data every time. But I wanted to show this just as an example of, like, this is an example of what the graph will look like, right? So, looking over time, whatever your independent variable is, if you set up this kind of a graph, you can actually see what happens over time. And so some people, like their first time around, they only measured data at one time point. And you can see that, if you had just randomly picked 50 weeks, right? And you would see you can make a bar graph of what happens at 50 weeks, but the time that you pick, which might be kind of random, right? If you had picked 100, you would get a totally different conclusion than if you had measured the numbers at 50, and if you had measured things at 25, you would get a different conclusion, right? So this would look like, oh, there's no difference between these things. So the reason that I want people to practice with making this kind of graph is that you will be able to see more information about how your independent variable changes. So this was a percentage of people infected over time. So the other thing that actually I thought was interesting about the way that this person set up their data table, it's actually different than the one that I suggested, but it will still work. So the video that I had made previously about how to set up the data table, I had my time on right across as these headers, and this person has their time going up and down. It's actually totally fine. But one thing, actually I was working on this in my Graphing Wednesday session. One thing that might be helpful to you guys at some point in your life is using this. If you decide that, hey, actually it would be better to, switch these around, you can do this paste special and transpose. And so this actually looks a lot, and again, you'd have to fix up some of these titles and things like that. But this is actually what my setup had kind of looked like. And I had ended up doing something like this where I did enter below, right? So I had like a trial 1, a trial 2, and a trial 3 for my 5 together. And then so I think one thing I'm going to sort of challenge people to do is make one large data table. And so and this, and again, there's not a way to say like, oh, like one's better than the other. So I might do mine like this, like my 3 trials and my average. As one data table, like this kind of makes sense to me to have everything in one data table that ideally you can. And the other thing, just because I'm showing you guys this example, you don't have to have this many time points. And I think the example that I set up, I had maybe like 5 different time points. So you could still measure something over maybe 100 weeks. But I think some people were measuring at, just 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 weeks, or just 20, 40, 60, 80. So I just wanted to point this out that I'm not expecting everyone to have this much data. And actually, I'm going to show you somebody else's let me show it to you now. This was somebody that was getting started. And so it looks like this is their independent variable. They also put time down here. To make your life easier, you probably want to just include the numbers because Google Sheets is going to have trouble graphing something with, right? So you can make a header, and even this up here, I think you can keep, I'm assuming this is the duration of the infection or something. So, you could say this is my time in years, right down here. Actually, I can put this header here. Right, so this is my time in years, but then this will actually, these are the values that I want for my x-axis. And actually, this person set up theirs similar to the other, but here's where I would, because ideally I want you guys to do a couple of different trials, right? So if this is your independent variable, you might say, here's my 10 weeks. Here's trial 1, trial 2, trial 3. And then you might just go ahead and put in the average here. So if this makes more sense for people as a type of a data table, right? And then you can get a little bit fancier in doing this. You can format, you can merge, where is it? Merge cells, right? So I could say, oh, these are 10 weeks, right? So this person could do this for 20 weeks to take 3 trials and take an average. So one thing that I'm going to show people, just in case you don't know how to do this, right? So let's say that I had, so I'm going to make these slightly different, 20, like again, you're going to get yours off of the simulation, but assuming that we had something like this, your average, you can just use this formula, equals average. And it's funny, oftentimes Google Sheets will say, hey, do you want to do this? Oftentimes they're right, but you could say, oh no, I want the average of these 3. You're going to end up plotting the average. And they've suggested autofilled, right? This is exactly what I wanted them to do. I want an average of the 3 trials, right? So just to see if probably a similar thing is going to happen. But in some people's simulation, right, their first trial was not their average. So it was actually helpful to take a couple different trials and to get an average value. So just some hints, because it seems like a lot of people are still in kind of like the data table phase. And you want to, you're thinking about like, okay, do I have at least 5 different time points? What period of time makes the most sense? 3 trials is a good place to start. If this were IB, you'd probably do 5, and then a formula for, so here, I could do average of, so there's a couple different ways that you can set up this data table. Oh, whoops, does that make sense? Average of, whoops. So this is supposed to be G3 through G5. And then I can, the magic box where I can click on this blue button, drag it over, and it will paste all those calculations. Right now, when I get my 3 trials for 120, I can put in that average. You might, right? So when you're plotting, you might want to just say, yeah, these are the values that I want to put in later for my, like these are going to be my averages for 5 weeks of infection. I think that's what this is. Yeah, duration of infection. And so, yeah, these, like I could put, okay, this is my duration of the infection, right? That's my independent variable, but I'm going to plot these all as different series on the graph. So actually, this one turned out to be, I'm going to save this as a separate video because it was really more about organizing data tables. And then I'm going to do another one really quickly for the making of the graphs.